It's great to chat with you, Sebastian. Honestly, the film is beautiful. It's a wonderful piece. Um,
Thank you.
where where did Verona come from?
Um, I grew up in a very small town in Canada called Verona, or I grew up near there, and I went to primary school in this small town. And then, yeah, when I wanted to make the film, I thought it would make a lot of sense for me just to shoot it there. Um, it's cheaper than shooting in like a larger city. I knew people there, so kind of like locations and stuff like this would be very easy from like a production standpoint. It made a lot of sense. And from a narrative framework, I was really curious about revisiting um, elements of like my life in the countryside and elements of my childhood and like adolescence, just from a perspective where I was like a little bit separated from it, which is really cool. Um, and it's still something I'm like kind of interested in. Like even now living in Europe, um, it's like the further I get away from Canada, the more like romantic I feel about it, which is very cool. It's I think actually makes me feel pretty lucky to have the capacity to move away to live somewhere else. Because now I like kind of appreciate where I was before in a different way, which I'm sure I think a lot of people kind of experience this. Um, but it's nice. It's like now I go back to Canada, I'm like, wow, I don't know, I like it, I enjoy it, it's very cute. And when I was there, I was like, I really want to leave. So yeah, no, I that's basically where the film came from was this I wanted to revisit this time through like a new lens. And it also just made a lot of sense just to do it there. So
This beautiful relationship in this film, and it's a very quiet piece.
mhm,
Very quiet piece. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. The power of quiet. It's so meditative.
mhm. I think like I I mean I was really into like I mean I just like when people are like I feel like there's a lot that you can just like tell from people when they're being quiet. Um I also am not the most amazing at writing dialogue, I'm not gonna lie. Um, so even like when like there was a lot of scenes with much more dialogue in them, and then when we were in the edit, I was like, what was I doing here? So it was also like a very practical approach to just being like, this story just works better with less dialogue because I was writing some weird stuff. Um, but I think, yeah, I don't know. It's just like I don't know. People like don't. I don't know. I guess people do talk a lot in real life, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know. There's just like there's a lot more happening when people are not talking than when they are talking. It's like, um, at least that's how I felt when I was making the film initially. Um, I think too, the the place itself was like a really big character that I wanted to have. Um, the flora and fauna sort of like breathing through the summer, just being like an element of the movie. Um, the whole look of the film is a bit like torched in a way. Like it's really like high contrast, but like underexposed and like burnt. Everything looks a bit like burnt. And this was like a really like interesting theme to like explore. Um, I don't know if it relates so much to silence, but it kind of like that's kind of where my brain went for a second. Um, yeah, I think it's yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead.
no, no, I love that. I love that because you're right. So much of the film, the colors almost bleed. Whether
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
reds or even the reds or the darks, they just sort of they weigh heavily on the performances and on the scenes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, I love that idea of it being burnt. That's a fascinating way to describe it.
Yeah, I think it was like it's a weird look. It's like I haven't really seen it much elsewhere. Um, I don't even know if I personally love it aesthetically, like for my own tastes. I don't know if it's my thing, which is kind of cool. I don't know. I think it's just interesting to make something like the whole film was in like the whole film was like a huge learning experience for me, which was really the purpose of like making the film. I was like, I need to make a film. I don't know how to make movies. I should make a movie and then I'll understand a bit more about how to do it. Um, and that definitely worked. I know a lot more about it now, and I feel much more like confident as a director. And I'm super excited to make another 10, 20 movies. If I am able and allowed to in this lifetime, that would be really cool. But I think that like I don't know, there's a lot of I feel like when people talk about like experimental films, they're like not talking about like actually experimenting. I feel like this was an experimental film. Like it was like I don't know what to do, so I'm going to try seven or 100 different things and see what actually works. And I don't know how much of it actually does work for me or for other people, which feels truly experimental. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know. There's people that make experimental film and they layer a bunch of like 16 mil, and it's like okay, cool. It's like you know yeah, it's an experiment, but like um I don't know, this feels like a real experimental film because I'm like, yeah, the grades, the sort of incongruity of like narrative and aesthetics, at least in my mind, things that feel like incongruent is like a really weird thing that I still go back and forth on constantly. I'm like, um, sorry, my battery. Yeah, that I go back and forth on. I'm like, oh, like it is burned, it is torched. Is that good? Is that not good? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Um, which is a very wild experience to have with something that you personally made. I feel like with other people's work, it's like of course, one has their opinions and one feels one way or the other, but I guess I would have expected to feel a bit more definitive about something that like I personally made. But I feel sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I made like the coolest, not the coolest, but like I made like a fascinating, interesting film that I'm like really into. And sometimes like, ooh, I'm like, what did we do here? Um, which is cool. It's like, I don't know, I don't want to shy away from my experience of the film or like how I feel about what I kind of came up with because it's not um yeah, I don't know. That's just like honestly how I feel about it. I'm like 50-50 on the movie, which is cool. Um yeah.
Well, there's a bit of a Malick vibe to it in that sense, you know. It sort of ebbs and flows with the narrative. I mean that as a compliment. Um,
I Malik is like has been a was like a huge one. I was definitely one of those kids where I was like I saw Tree of Life and I was like, wow. I was like, I want to make movies. Um and now it's actually really funny because now I'm like kind of like I don't know. His work. I saw Thin Red Line for the first time a couple of years ago. Um, Amazing movie, crazy, absolutely stunning film. Tree of Life I rewatched and I was like, this is good, like it's beautiful, but it's also like John Taverner and Preisner, the like composers, the Lacrimosas, Preisner, and Funeral Canticle is John Taverner, which are like the biggest songs in that movie, and like huge tracks, like just like crazy, crazy songs. I'm like, is this a good movie or are these songs just really, really good? Which I think is really funny. And then I don't know his later work. I'm like, someone recently told me to like revisit some of them, but I don't know. It's an interesting. I I'm not. I'm like I don't understand what he's doing now with movies. It's weird. He's just like he just gets the biggest actors ever, and then they just walk around and like monologue a little bit, which is fascinating. Um, but I do appreciate it. It's really nice. And honestly, yeah, like I like he's been, I think like a lot of other filmmakers, he's like been a huge influence because yeah, it's just like yeah, beautiful stuff.
yeah, absolutely. One of the lines in your film that really jumped out at me, I wanted to ask you about it. It's near the beginning, and they say, "God isn't scared of complicated people." I was just wondering what
Mm,
that means to you. It sort of fits the theme of the film, I thought, but I was just wondering what that means to you.
totally. It is, I think it's a really important idea. Um, I That's a really great question. I really like that line. It's actually 80 yard, which is funny. Or no, was it? Yeah, it's just like, yeah, no, it's literally VO. So I wrote it like not a few months ago, but I think like 6 months ago. So it was much later in the process of making fun of that writing actually happened. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, I really like that line. It's like the I think people have a very complicated relationship with like God, religion, spirituality, and what that all kind of comes with. Actually, I think maybe my least complicated relationship was with God or the idea of God, but that's kind of like that really ties into it. I think like people I find it fascinating that people go to an institution that believes in this idea of a God that is like as immense as they believe God is, but then like we get so kind of fucked up over relatively minor issues. Like, I think life is full of paradoxes. I think people are full of paradoxes. I don't think this is like a revelationary, like, this isn't like a revolutionary idea or like a revelatory idea. Like, this is like life is just kind of a bit weird, and people are like, they are not, it's just like it's a practical fact that people are different things, that they act different ways, that they are complicated, that they're strange, that they are, um, that they have sometimes seemingly opposing beliefs and actions and etc. Like we're just like very complicated generally. And I think if someone isn't complicated or like or they don't think they're complicated, they're I don't know, they're maybe missing out on something, or they're maybe doing a disservice to their own sense of what being human is like. Um Maybe a bit strong for some people, but anyway, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I find it like kind of crazy that like I don't know. It's like if there's a God and that God is what people say God is, like I don't know, like people are just mm, I guess I don't think it's like the highest form of being human to sort of be totally under control or totally perfect, you know? I think it's and by perfect I mean uh I don't know what the sort of what spiritual institutions ideas. By institutions, I mean like the church, like multiple and other like sort of globally accepted religions. It's like there's an idea of perfection, um, and I don't think that's like the most important element of like being a person. I think like when we're accepting those like strange parts of ourselves that are a bit out of control, or like or not even accepting those parts, but just like um I don't know, acting out or like being weird or like getting or being a little bit out of control. I think those are like that's just a really big important part of being a person. And I think we would all be a little bit better off to accept those moments. It's like if you have like I don't know, like sometimes people just do like weird shit and it's like not for us to judge other people, and it's also not for us to judge ourselves. It's like I mean in the narrative that's what happens. People do like weird things. Like they're just like Camilla obviously is just doing her life and she um just like decides like I don't know, it doesn't really matter to me to like spoil the film too much. There's more going on in the film than this, but like she just cheats on her girlfriend and it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I would argue that she's maybe, I guess we'll see in the future of her life. I don't know, but like sometimes I wonder if people are better off for not doing the crazy shit they want to do. Like sometimes it's like, sorry, I'm kind of like finding my way to this idea that's behind
Love it. Go.
the line, because also this is something I'm thinking about a lot in my present life. But just this idea that like, are you better off not doing that crazy shit, or do you kind of have to get something out of your system? And like, I'm not trying to disregard all the complications that come from, you know, these difficult parts of our lives. I think that like, you know, we do things, we cause pain to other people, we cause pain to ourselves. I think the interesting part that I'm sort of working through right now, artistically, and also like kind of playing around with in the film is like, is that such a bad thing? Like, is it, do we, is our value of like comfort, security, and like um some form of perfection, like just a bit misplaced? Like, it's kind of okay for people just to like mess around and do their thing. Um, and I can't imagine that there's like that if there's a God, I cannot fathom the idea that that God can't handle a bit of like weird shit going on. And I think that's kind of cool. And I don't think people really, at least not in sort of religious or spiritual communities, have, at least the way that I've experienced it, there isn't so much capacity for this idea, which I think is a little bit funny, uh, considering sort of the ideas behind it. But there's always this idea of like healing. There's always this idea of like moving forward, of like a linear path to either enlightenment or forgiveness or purity or perfection or whatever. And I don't think that's actually like that important. I think it's just like, people are people, and like life is not linear, nothing is linear, everything is like happening when it needs to happen. We do things for reasons that we can't explain, and like instead of trying to like cure people or heal them or whatever, it's just like, yeah, cool, that's what that person is doing, and do you have the capacity to be around it or not? And I don't know if that's actually like, uh I don't even know how I feel about that idea, but I'm just super interested in it. And I love the idea that just like we're restricting such an immense part of like living by being afraid of like, I don't know, madness or people acting out. Um and where the lines are about like what's appropriate and what's inappropriate and what's going on in life and whatever. It's like a whole other conversation. But yeah, there's something in there about like this idea of God, this idea of complexity, and like, yeah, just like if God is what people believe God is, then I don't know, like it's like he doesn't care about it was she or they, like that entity, this an infinite entity that has knowledge of everything and truly unconditional love, like
Mm.
doesn't care if you're like gay, or doesn't care if you like, I don't know, got fired, or probably doesn't care if you get really rich, doesn't care. Like I'm just like these things just don't feel like they're that relevant for a being that loves us no matter what. um and yeah, so that's what's happening with that line. um
I love this. I'm loving this conversation. And Sebastian, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I would
no
love to keep
worries. I
mining this
mean,
with you more.
whatever whatever you can. I just realize I'm literally just like a floating face talking about these weird god ideas. Whatever you can do with whatever just happened, uh, I'm sure it'll be great.
That's okay.
Um,
Uh, God isn't
but
scared of
yeah,
complicated people or moments, so we're good. Uh, no, thank you so much for your
absolutely.
time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you
Of
so much
course.
for your time. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate it. And the film's
Cool.
beautiful. I wish you the best.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.